when entrepreneurs go to market and they're going to sell their company, you have to talk to buyers, right? And oftentimes you have to bring a couple of your team together with those buyers to answer questions. And imagine for the entrepreneur, it's stressful. But for the senior team that has to be involved in that, it might be your COO, your CFO, maybe your director of sales. So imagine those 4 people talking to a buyer at like, this is it. We're gonna have a 4-6 hour meeting, and then we're gonna get an offer, and we're gonna go forward. So the entrepreneur's nervous normally, but the senior team is terrified because they don't want to, especially if they're tight knit, they don't want to screw it up for the entrepreneur, and they have a stake in the outcome. Hopefully, we want them to have a stake in the outcome. They don't want to screw it up for themselves either. So, and they get peppered with questions. And normally what happens is you're in a windowless hotel conference room, and there's a long conference table, and you sit on one side in the chairs, and then the buyer marches in with their 4 or 5 people, and they sit across the table. So you're already a little bit adversarial. But buyers have gotten pretty good at like asking questions to kind of wear people down, and stuff that seems harmless or innocuous or like, oh, that's a nice, easy to answer, are oftentimes the biggest traps. So what we teach those teams is every time you're directly asked a question, pause for a moment and think about what's the question behind the question. So they might be asking you, a buyer might be really concerned about, let's say, gross margin. Well, they're not going to come out and say, hey, why is gross margin on these 3 product lines like wildly different than these other 4 product lines? They may ask that, but they don't want to be confrontational. They just want the information. So they may ask a seemingly innocuous question like, oh, I see that 30% of your sales, come from these 3 products. How do you think about those products relative to these other 4? What they're asking is the question behind the question, why the hell are the margins so low on these 3? But if you're not thinking about, all right, why are they asking me this? You just start blabbing on about those 3 products, and invariably in the answer somewhere, you will reveal why the margins are lower. So if you just pause for a second, and remember, every question, every answer is adding to or subtracting from the story that the buyer's trying to put together in their mind. So you want to be really thoughtful about, and again, in the harmless questions, you want to be really thoughtful about how you answer, because your answer is going to be there forever. Like you're not going to be able to say, scratch that, I want to go back and say something else. By then, it's way too late. So what's the question behind the question? Why are they asking me this? Why are they interested in this? The corollary to that is, if they're asking a bunch of questions about one topic, they care deeply about that topic. And sometimes you're really excited to share another story or to talk about something else. And those things might be irrelevant to the value creation, because every buyer is interested in different things that they're buying from a company. So if you're thoughtful about why they're asking and you lean into those questions, there's gold in there, but you don't want to answer in ways that kind of like basically show your hand. You're not trying to overshare. The other thing that happens is, and we coach, again, entrepreneurs are pretty good with this one. Senior teams are awful because they're nervous. Someone will ask a question about X and they'll answer it, and then they'll answer 5 other questions that weren't asked, Y, Z, A, B, C, and you're like, stop talking. Like, they asked you a question, answer it directly, know what the story is you're trying to portray, and then shut up. So I have a rule when I work with clients in this process. This is an unbreakable for me. If I interrupt you, I may interrupt you mid-sentence. If I interrupt you, you need to immediately, stop talking. I'm not interrupting to be rude. You're just meandering down a path that you shouldn't be meandering down. And that, for me, it's great because I get to sit there and watch, and I know the question behind all the damn questions, and I can stop them in the process. But if you don't have someone there watching out for that, invariably you overshare. And every time you overshare, you're diminishing the value. And it's it's a really important thing that you are like really focused on what you're answering, what you're not answering, and thinking about why did they ask that.